Okay, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I know we still have people that are coming, will be logged on soon. Thank everybody for their time, taking the time out here to have Bible study with us. We have a lot of information to go over on tonight, and so we want to go ahead and get started. Tonight, Elder Ephraim and myself, we're going to talk about Bethel, which is the universal house of God in the gate of heaven. I think that everybody should be on. Before we get started, let's go ahead and go through our little proclamation here that no part of this publication may be reproduced or retransmitted without the express written consent of Bethel Temple Inc. of Chicago, which is under the leadership of Chief Apostle Dr. Yeho Kanabi Aman. The information that you are about to be presented is not independent of Bethel Temple Inc. of Chicago or Dr. Aman, who through revelational research, which includes biblical hermeneutics, has discovered the ancient biblical principles that were once kept by the prophets of old and later by Christ in the New Testament. These same principles were taught to the disciples by the Messiah, who then commanded them to go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. Everyone should be logged on now. If there's anyone that is participating that cannot hear or cannot see the screen, need to just go through these instructions. Once you log on, press on the green telephone icon next to mic and speakers, and it'll turn red. At that point, you should be able to hear and see us. If you guys have any kind of problems, just send us information through the chat system here. As we do, we have the Bible studies that are set up into two different parts. Part one is more of a lecture. Part two is when we're going to open it up for questions and answers. When we get to the end, we have a little keypad that's on the side of your blue screen that's under the little microphone icon. Go ahead and hit *6 on that once we open up for question and answers, and then you can go ahead and just ask your question. If you're on the telephone and just giving us a call, hit *6 on your telephone keypad. We have just about 3 objectives, and these objectives are going to take the majority of the time on today. One of the first objectives, what we want to do is to show that God's house must be called by his name. Okay, we're going to show that that's a commandment. We also are going to show that this house and this name is worldwide. And so it's not something that's limited to a location in Jerusalem or a place in Chicago or a place in California, that this house and this name is worldwide, and we're going to show why it's worldwide. We also are going to show that this house, which is called by his name, is the foundation of many generations. So we ask that you have your notepad and your pen and pencil ready in case you have some questions. We try to have the slide numbers at the bottom right-hand corner. So if there's something regarding a particular slide, just let us know what slide number it is. We can go back to it. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Elder Ephraim, who co-hosts the Bible study with me, and he's going to chime in from time to time on the study. So God reveals, which is El, reveals the name of his house to Jacob. If we take a look at Genesis, the 28th chapter, verse 16 through 19, I'm going to go ahead and just read that. It says, "And Jacob awaked out of his sleep, and he said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. And he was afraid and said, How dreadful is this place? This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." Now, when you hear a lot of people probably read this particular Bible verse, or even when they say Bethel, they describe it as the house of God. Jacob described it as the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. And we go to verse 18. It says, "And Jacob rose up early in the morning and took the stone that he had put for his pillows, and set it up for a pillar, and poured oil upon the top of it. And he called the name of that place," and in our English Bible we see Bethel. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and as we get to the next slide, we have to just explain and simplify. As a lot of people may know, but this might be some background information for others, why we say Bethel. So, but the Bible is clear in this Bible verse that Jacob stumbled upon a place. And when he said, "How dreadful is this place?" The Bible lets us know, when you look at dreadful, Some places it says awesome. He was in awe. Not only was he in awe, he was terrified because he said, this is the house of God and the gate of heaven. Now, for you to think of, my supreme God, who is creator of everything, Jacob stumbled up on a place where God was dwelling. And now we're not saying his complete presence, and we're going to talk about that a little later on. So he was both in awe and he was both terrified. But the Bible said that he named that place Bethel.
Well, Bethel.
If we turn to 1008 of the Strong's Concordance, we see that Bethel, when we look it up in the Hebrew, that the transliteration, the Hebrew word for it is Bethel. And we see here that the transliteration is Bethel. So you will continue to hear us use the word Bethel and not Bethel, because we know that Bethel is an English word and Jacob didn't speak any English. English didn't exist. So in the Hebrew language, it was pronounced Bethel. So keep that in mind as we go through, that Bethel equals Bethel when you see it in the Bible. And we will refer to it as Bethel. So again, and he called the name of that place Beyth in Hebrew. Now, if we look at Genesis, the 31st chapter, verse 13, and it's important, Elder Erie, as we go through these particular Bible verses, these Bible verses are critical because some people, of course, will say that Jacob received this information through a dream. So how do we validate that? In Genesis, the 31st chapter, verse 13, God confirms Jacob's dream. And he confirms it when he says, I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowest a vow unto me. Now arise, get thee out from this land, and return unto the land of thy kindred. And so we look at this preposition, this word of, and we talked about this on last week. What does the word of means? And of is indicative. It shows an origin or a source. And so when he says, I am the God of Bethel, God is saying that I belong to Bethel. This place is mine. Now, Jacob, from what we see in the Bible, through a dream, or as we say, divine revelation, he's the one who said the name first. He's the one who had this concept and said, oh, God is in this place, and he called it Bethel. But we're going to show other Bible verses where this was divinely inspired. And so we want to focus on that word, the word of. That preposition means that God is saying later on to Jacob that I belong to this place. I am the origin, or I'm the source of Bethel.
That's all right. And if I might just say for just a minute, when we look at this verse very carefully, not only does it say, I am the God of Bethel, if you look at that phrase in the second line, it says, where thou vowedest a vow unto me. So not only is God now coming to Jacob and verifying that the name that he gave is correct, he's verifying that the dream you had was correct, and that when you first met with me, where you made the vow, that was me that gave you the dream. So, I mean, we shouldn't take it unusual when he gives us a dream, because especially during this particular era and onward, men were given dreams, and they were able to validate the dream based on, number one, a dream coming to pass, and a number of other things. This verse actually validates Genesis, the 28th chapter, where God himself is speaking and saying, I am the God of meaning belonging to, showing some type of ownership of Bethel. Okay? And I'm talking about the Bethel, Jacob, where you vowed the vow at. I am the God of Bethel.
Okay, great. So we're going to see in this next Bible verse that God commanded Jacob to go to Bethel and dwell there. In turn, Jacob commanded all those that were with him to go to Bethel. So if you turn to the book of Genesis, the 35th chapter, verse 1 through 3, it says, and El said unto Jacob, arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there, and make there an altar unto El. And so why would Jacob go dwell there? What was the purpose of him going to dwell there? And he said to make an altar unto El, that appeared unto thee when thou fleddest from the face of Esau thy brother. Now this is what's interesting. In verse 2, it says, then Jacob said unto his household and to all that were with him, he said, put away the strange gods that are among you, and be clean, and change your garments, and let us arise and go up to Bethel. So there was a commandment given for Jacob to go up to Bethel, but we see that Jacob was taking not just his family, but everybody that was with him. He said, let us go up to Bethel, and I will make there an altar unto God, who answered me in the day of my distress. And I have that underlined because we're going to see how this place is also a source of protection. And it says, and was with me in the way which I went. So we're seeing here that that God commanded Jacob, and then Jacob in turn, Jacob didn't go by himself. He took his family there, and he said, put away your strange gods. So now they're turning from some ways that they were prior to this time, and now they're going to go up and clean themselves and go up to Bethel. As I said,
well, another thing that I'll go right ahead.
No, go ahead, Elder.
I just wanted to point out the first verse after the 28th chapter was a confirmation that the dream that Jacob had was truly from God. Well, the verse does the same thing. It just does it in a different way. Why would God tell Jacob to go to Bethel if he had not authorized Bethel?
Right.
So he's giving him a command. I want you to go back to Bethel. Now, you met me in Bethel. You gave the name when I revealed it to you in a dream, but I want you now to go back to that place, okay, because you're going to meet with me again. So this is another confirmation that Bethel is a name that was given to him in the dream. So Jacob was not a lunatic. Okay, people have dreams today, but guess what they do when they have a dream? They don't validate it. You have to validate a dream. And Jacob's dream came from God.
Beautiful. Bethel is the source of information and protection. You remember we just showed that Jacob said that we're going to go back to this place where El met me in my time of distress. And we're going to see a number of different Bible verses where people prayed that El meet them there in the time of distress, or even some of the testimonies that some of the saints after Jacob had regarding Bethel. In the book of Psalms, the 27th chapter, verse 4, it reads, it says, one thing have I desired of the Lord. Now, just one thing. So this tells you how important this place is. One thing have I desired. And many of us have read this Bible verse before. Of the Lord that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Yehovah. So you're beholding the beauty. That means that his presence, there was something there if you were beholding the beauty. Now, I'm not saying that he went there and physically seen somebody there, but when his presence was there, he's telling you that I can behold the beauty. His presence is here. And to inquire in his temple. So there was something about this place where information was given. As you remember and you read the story about Jacob's ladder, we see that when Jacob was asleep, that the angels were ascending and they were descending. And these were prayers going up. These were answers coming down. So people go to Bethel, to the temple, to get information. And this is what this Bible verse is telling you, to inquire in this temple. It goes on in verse 5, says, for in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me. He shall set me up upon a rock. So now you're going to not just inquire, but you're going to get information of protection. And as you read through the Bible, many stories, the Maccabees, when you talk about the Feast of Dedications, they fought so hard for the temple, not just because it was a temple or not because it was a place like their home, but they understood the significance of the temple. And we're going to go through some of those tonight. I believe this is 1 King, the 8th chapter, verse 28 to 30. And this was a prayer that went up. It says, that thine eyes may be open toward this house night and day, even toward the place of which thou hast said, my name shall be there. Now, many people, we hear the word Solomon's temple so much that many people actually believe that Solomon's temple was called Solomon's temple. But we see here that Solomon had the name of God on there. It says, my name shall be there, that thou mayest hearken unto the prayer which thy servant shall make toward this place. So we're associating a place with a name. Verse 30 says, and hearken thou to the supplication of thy servant, and to thy people Yisra'el, when they shall pray toward this place, and hear thou in heaven thy dwelling place, and when thou hearest, forgive. So not only were they praying towards this place, the information, he was speaking to them down from Bethel. And this is what this Bible verse is telling us. This is, again, 1 Kings, the 8th chapter, verse 28 through 30. God gave
That's all right.
Go ahead, Elder.
If I might just step in for a minute, I want us to remember that we said that Bethel is a source of information and protection. And throughout this Bible study, I want you to note that in the verses that we read. Now, if you remember, when we talk about protection, Jacob was on the run in the 28th chapter. He was fleeing from his brother Esau. If you know anything about the story, remember there's a number of things that had taken place, and he had to get on the run from his brother. Well, the idea is that when he lighted upon this place called Bethel, it became a place, a source of protection for him. And throughout this study, you're going to see how it was a source of study. But it's also a source of information, because it's in Bethel that you inquire in his temple, that you ask questions, and that's even what a purpose for prayer. In his house you pray, and you receive answers. And as it was pointed out, now I'll stop with this, the angels were ascending and descending, so they were taking prayers up to God in heaven, and they were bringing answers down. So when you pray, you look forward to an answer.
Excellent. And we have to remember that, I know we're fighting against a paradigm that, tells you can pray, and you can pray wherever you want to pray. I'm not saying you can't pray at home and you can't pray in your car, but we can't diminish what the Bible says regarding his house. And, I know people will say, well, I pray, and I know that he hears my prayers, and I know that he answers my prayers. And so it's important that we use the Bible to show the importance of his house and what happens as a result of his house. Okay, God gave the universal name for the universal place of worship worldwide, and what we want to do is show that Bethel is a universal place. People may say, I know about the temple in Jerusalem, and most people, if you talk to them who know anything about the Bible, they talk about the restoration of a temple in Jerusalem, or they talk about one place that was in Jerusalem. But we're going to see that Bethel was worldwide, even thousands of years ago. And furthermore, to show why Bethel has to be established as worldwide again today. In Exodus, the 20th chapter, verse 24, it shows that Bethel is universal. It says, an altar of earth thou shalt make unto me, and shalt sacrifice therein thy burnt offerings, and thy peace offerings, thy sheep and thine oxen. In all places where I record my name, I will come unto thee, and I will bless thee. And so even just looking at one word, or two words, all, or you can just look at places. Places is plural. In all places, this means that every place where his house is must carry the same name. Okay? Because he says, my name. It can't have your name. It wasn't called Solomon's temple, and it wasn't called the Church of Shiloh, and they didn't have a Church of Jerusalem, but in all places where his name was recorded. Now, we see in the Bible that Jacob was divinely inspired, and we're going to go ahead and prove that a little further. But Jacob was divinely inspired. And Jacob said that the name of the house was Bethel. And we seen that in the book of Genesis, the 31st chapter, that Jacob wasn't crazy. God confirmed and said, yes, I am the God of Bethel. And so this name was divinely inspired. And so the name of the temple was Bethel. And we're going to go and talk about how it was recorded and things like that, because something that he says, I record. Now, if I tell you to record your name, you're not going to speak it to me. You're not going to, telekinesis the name to me. Record means to write. This means that the name Bethel must, and this is not optional, the name, because it's his name, it must be recorded on his house. The name on his house must be written in an ancient Hebrew writing style, wherever it's written. Now, that's another lesson that we can't go into today, but wherever the name is recorded, we talked about this when we talked about the Hebrew salvation name on last week, that wherever the name is recorded, it has to be recorded the same way it's recorded back on Solomon's temple. So even if you speak English, we know that the name was recorded in a certain ancient Hebrew script. And so I can have my English Bethel written on my building here, because most people don't know how to read Paleo-Hebrew. But there's a recording that has to go on the building. If they're in China, they may have the name Bethel written in Chinese letter, but then they also have to have the ancient Hebrew script. So their script is going to look just like our script. When we're in Russia, the name Bethel has to be written the exact same way. So this is a universal name. That means wherever you go, that ancient Hebrew script will be written the same way on God's house. And furthermore, it says, my name. This name belongs to the Father. Therefore, it must be found in the Bible as a name that is on his house. Today, people name their name St. Luke, First Baptist Missionary. I mean, they call their places by all kind of names. And this is something that, Elder, that is not emphasized. It's not talked about. It's not even something in the mind of people that God has a name for his house. Now, people will argue and say that God has a personal name. I mean, either people are diehard Jesus fans, or people say he has a Hebrew name, and then we can emphasize on his personal salvation name. But whether it's his salvation name or whether it's his house, he has a name that's personal to him. And this Bible verse tells us that wherever, in all places where his name is recorded, he's going to come and bless.
Well, if I might just for a minute just jump in. When we talk about my name, the Bible uses this in two different ways in relationship to God. When he says where my name is, he could be talking about his personal name, or he could be talking about a name that he instituted. Now, for example, if we look at Bethel, Bethel is not his personal name. In other words, he doesn't carry this name to identify himself. Right. It identifies his house. So that is a name that's not his personal name. It is a name that he instituted, however. Now, but then there's also name, if you look inside that word Bethel, you'll see at the end of it you have El. El is his personal name. So that's why you'll see Bethel, and even when it comes to the name of his people, Yisra'el, he named his people, so they carry his name within their name.
Right. That's right. I hope that's clear to people, that the way you spell Bethel, B-E-Y-T-H, we got a dash, Aleph, E-L. You know, so El, his personal name is there. When we say Yisra'el, you know, we spell it Y-I-S-R-A, and then you have your apostrophe, Aleph, and then you have E-L. So you have El there again. So as Elder Ivory is saying, that his personal name is inside these other names. As our perfect example, the Messiah Christ and the apostles went to Bethel. And now this is important because I think it was 1 Peter 2:21 that said that he left us an example that we should walk in his steps. We should do what he did. Now, in order to see Bethel, especially when you start getting to the New Testament, you will see a lot of descriptions of Bethel. And we have to use other Bible verses to show that it was Bethel. If we look at 1 Kings, the 9th chapter, verse 1 through 3, and it talked about this temple that Solomon built for the name of El. It says, and it came to pass when Solomon had finished the building of the house of the Lord, and the king's house, and the Lord said unto him, I have heard thy prayer and thy supplication, that thou hast made before me. I have hallowed this house, which thou hast built, to put my name there. And he said, forever. Now, some people say, well, the temple was destroyed. But he said that his name is going to be there forever. Now, forever means without ending. And it goes on to say that, and mine eyes and mine heart shall be there perpetually. And that means without cease. It's going to constantly be there. So it's important from 1 Kings, the 9th chapter. You have to understand this Bible verse before we go to the next one, that Solomon's temple had El's name on it.
That's so all right.
When we go to the New Testament, in the book of John, the 10th chapter, verse 22 and 23, it says, and it was at Jerusalem the feast of the dedications, and it was winter. And the Bible says, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. Now, you have to understand 1 Kings 9, 1 and 3 to understand that Solomon's porch was not called Solomon's porch. But Solomon's porch was at Solomon's temple. And Solomon's temple had God's name written on there. And so this is a description of where the Messiah went, and it classified it as Solomon's porch. But we have to put all the Bible verses together to see that God had a name for his house. It was called Bethel. We see that Solomon built a house, and he put God's name on it. So here in the book of John, the 10th chapter, verse 22 and 23, the Messiah walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. In the book of John, the 7th chapter, verse 2, 8, and 10, it talks about another feast. It says, now the Jews' feast of tabernacles was at hand. Now, remember our perfect example. Christ says, go ye up unto this feast. I go not up yet unto this feast, for my time is not yet full come. But when his brethren were gone up, then went he also up unto the feast, not openly, but as it were in secret. Now, we can use these Bible verses to show as a perfect example that we ought to keep these feast days as well. But the point is that, and we're going to show, I think, in the next slide, that the feast days were kept in Bethel.
Right. That's all right. But, you know, if I can add really briefly, because this is a misunderstanding that people have. They think that the temple that Solomon built was named Solomon's temple.
Right.
Well, that's what people in the world refer to it as. That's what textbooks refer to it as. But if you look back at 1 Kings, this is between Solomon and God is saying, I have hallowed this place. And why have you done this? He said, to put my name there forever. So Solomon is not God's name. So the name that he put there, we went over that earlier, that name was Bethel. So we'll find out later on that through translation and through various other things that took place, you might see the word house of God. You might even see the word Bethel. But this is letting you know that this was the house of God. This was his place. It might be describing it. But the name of that place we talked about earlier. The name of the place is Bethel. But it might be described as the house of God, or as use the English word Bethel.
Excellent. God's house called by his name. We're going to look at a number of different Bible verses that, and we're going to continue to emphasize on not only is God's house called by his name, but we're going to show that it was universal. This is important on a number of different reasons. Deuteronomy is the 16th chapter, verse 6. Now, I don't want to go into that area, but even people who believe in the Passover, we believe in keeping the Passover. But look at what Deuteronomy, the 16th chapter, verse 6 say. You can't separate certain things out of the Bible. And it says here that, but at the place which the Lord thy God shall choose to place his name in, there thou shalt sacrifice the Passover at even, at the going down of the sun, at the season that thou camest forth out of Egypt. Passover at the place where he has chosen to place his name. In the book of Jeremiah, the 7th chapter, verse 10, it says, and come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, we are delivered to do all these abominations. We looked in the book of Genesis, the 28th chapter. We read that earlier, and we're showing that a particular city. It says, and he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of that city was called Luz at the first. The reason we use this Bible verse because we're going to see that Bethel was in other cities. Lastly, in the book of Jeremiah, and we read verse 10, but chapter 7, verse 12 through 14, it says, but go ye now unto my place, which was in Shiloh. Now, Genesis, the 28th chapter, verse 19 that I just read, we see that this Bethel was in the city of Luz. Here it says, but go ye now unto my place, which was in Shiloh, where I set my name at the first, and see what I did to the wickedness of my people Yisra'el. Okay, if we go down to verse 14, it says, therefore will I do unto this house. So this house that he's talking about now was not in Shiloh. Okay, therefore will I do unto this house, which is called by my name, wherein ye trust, and unto the place which I gave to you and to your fathers, as I have done to Shiloh. Okay, so we see multiple locations, Elder. Here we see Luz, we see Shiloh. We're talking about another location. Even from the book of, and this is starting from the book of Genesis, and here we are all the way in the book of Jeremiah, and El is still talking about this place, which is called by his name. And
that connection that you mentioned earlier, the place with the name is made throughout each one of these verses. And even later on, maybe perhaps not in this particular study, we can show them Bethel in Jerusalem, Bethel in Mizpah, Bethel in various other places. So the idea is that when God established it, he established it to be a universal place of worship, and not just a local place.
Right. And I do want to make mention that as we develop the Bible studies, not the Bible studies, but as we develop the lessons, we have about 22 lessons on Bethel. So we're trying to kind of cram in and just focus on Bethel being a universal church, a universal name for God's house. And so I do know that questions will come up, but we have 22 lessons just on Bethel alone. But here we're trying to just emphasize on this one particular principle. The prophetic significance of Feast of Yisra'el. We just talked about the feast, and this is important. If you look in 2 Chronicles, the 2nd chapter, verse 4, it says, behold, I build an house to the name of the Lord my God, to dedicate it to him, and to burn before him sweet incense, and for the continual showbread, and for the burnt offerings morning and evenings, on the Sabbaths, and on the new moons, and on the solemn feast of the Yisra'el. This is an ordinance forever to Yisrael. So the Bible verse is talking about the Sabbaths, the moons, the solemn feast days, being kept in the house that El's name is on. And it said this is an ordinance forever to Yisrael. Now, some people that may not understand that particular last sentence, we're going to have a Bible study on that later, because of course, I know some people say, well, I'm not Yisrael, so this doesn't apply to me. Well, it does apply to you, and we can show you how this applies to you. Now, the reason that this is important, because if you ever read the book of Esther, when it talks about the Feast of Purim, it talks about this feast, and it talks about that after the feast and after the Jews fought and they, and they got victory, that there was a feast. that was ordained. Let me read that real quick. In verse 28, it says, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. So what's so important about that? That the Feast of Purim has to be kept in every province and every city. Now, if you read the story and you know anything about the story of Purim, Esther was over 127 provinces. Now, to give you an idea of what 127 provinces is, if you look on the map, when we finish the Bible study, look on the map at Canada. Canada has 10 provinces. And look how big Canada is. She was over 127 provinces. And so, do you think that everybody came? If they had to keep the feast as an ordinance forever, do you think that everybody from 127 provinces came to one place? So this Bible verse shows that there had to be Bethel, because remember we just read that, behold, I build a house of the name of the Yehovah, that it was an ordinance forever to Yisra'el to keep the feast days and the Sabbaths and the new moons in this place. And so these two Bible verses alone, Elder, tells us that there had to be multiple Bethels.
Oh, that's all right. Now, let me, if I may, before you go on.
Sure.
You said earlier that some people might say this doesn't apply to me, that it's applied to Yisrael. Well, this applies to the people of God everywhere. Now, if you're not his people, then perhaps you're right. It doesn't apply to you. But you can't be his people and be something else other than what he told you to be. You can't be his people and go somewhere other than where he told you to go. So I'm going to allow some people to say that this doesn't apply to me. But at the same time, don't think you can come up some other way and be his people and yet not honor Bethel, because that's the name that he gave. It's not the name your mother gave. It may not be the name your pastor gave, but it's the name that God gave.
Good. That's right. Jacob's testimony of Bethel and Yisra'el was inspired by God. And, you know, this is one of the things that we talked about earlier, that some people would say, well, Jacob had a dream and he named the place Bethel. All right, so he had a testimony, and this was inspired. Now, if we look in the book of Psalms, the 78th chapter, verse 5, it says, for he established, this is talking about God now, he established a testimony in Jacob. We read one of the testimonies. There's a couple of testimonies he established in Jacob. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But he established a testimony in Jacob, and he appointed a law in Yisra'el, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children. So it wasn't just for one generation. Okay, and we're going to see that it was upon multiple generations. So the subject here we're talking about is Bethel, that he established something in Jacob. Now, what is one of the things that we do know from what we've read so far? That Jacob stumbled upon a place, and he said, this is none other but the house of God and the gate of heaven, and he named that place Bethel. Okay, so we talked about that. We're going to see what the law was. Now, if you just really think about that, this is the house of God and the gate of heaven. And if you think about that concept, a gate connects 2 points together. It is the house of God and it is the gate of heaven. So if I want to get into the kingdom, I think I better get to the gate. And to get to the gate, I better come to the house. So let's look and see what those testimonies were. Before we do that, Psalms 147 and 19. It said that he showeth his word unto Jacob, his statutes and his judgment unto Yisra'el. So what was the testimony? Okay. There was a couple of testimonies that we want to focus on here. And as I just told you, in Genesis the 28th chapter, verse 16 through 19, One of the testimonies that Jacob had was that the house of God and the gate of heaven was named Bethel, and that El dwelled in this place. We're going to see that he dwelled in this place. Some people, God is too big to dwell in any house. And that's why Jacob was so stunned. He was such an awe. We're not saying the complete spirit of El dwelled in a place, but there is a portion of El that dwells in his house, and there's a reason that he does that. Okay? What other testimony did Jacob get? In the book of Genesis, the 32nd chapter, verse 28, it says, and he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob. Remember when Jacob was wrestling with the angel of God? It says, your name should be no longer called Jacob. Now, if you read the whole story, Jacob said, I will not let you go until you bless me. Now, Jacob didn't get a whole bunch of cattle. Jacob didn't get money. Jacob didn't get the finest clothes. But the angel said, what is thy name? And he said, my name is Jacob. He said, your name shall be called no more Jacob, but Yisra'el. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. So he received another blessing. He asked for a blessing, and he received the name of Yisra'el. And the name by itself shows you it's a blessing. It means to have power. I mean, what greater blessing can you have in this world than to have power with God and with man, and to prevail over every circumstance you have? That is the greatest blessing that you can have. And so these are two of the testimonies that we want to focus on, Elder, before we go into the law. Do you have something to say about these testimonies?
Yes, I do, and I probably will need your help with this too. Now, remember, Jacob got the name Bethel while he was actually in Bethel. So right. God appeared to him and revealed him that name while he was there. Well, where did he get the name Yisra'el from? Now, I can't remember where that verse is, but you could probably help me with that. Jacob was in the place where God had spoken to him previously. And so this is why we are saying that this is a place where you can get information as well as a place of protection. El will protect you in his house. Okay? He will bless you in his house. This name, Yisrael, was a blessing. Remember, Jacob was fleeing from his brother, and the blessing was that when he got there, you got to read the story in Genesis so you get the whole picture. You were talking about a minute ago about the house of God and the gate of heaven. Well, no, God is not going to just dwell. All of God is not going to dwell in this one place. But if you read the story, you'll find that God was in heaven. That's where Bethel came from, and the latter show how it was extended from heaven to earth. So he was introducing his house to man on earth by way of Jacob. And if I can just say this last thing and I can get out of the way, Jacob was the founder. So if you have a house and you got any founder but Jacob, you got the wrong house. I'm going to say that again because that makes it's got to be clear.
Right.
I don't care what bishop you call your founder. If it wasn't founded by Jacob, you in the wrong house. That's all I need to say on that.
All right. And that could be found, Elder, in Genesis, the 35th chapter. If they read verse 1 through 10, it tells you that, when Jacob stumbled upon Bethel, he got the revelation in Bethel. He was in Bethel when he discovered that this is Bethel. Okay? When he wrestled with that angel, I believe it's verse 10 in the book of Genesis, the 35th chapter, it tells you that he was in Bethel. So the source of information comes out of Bethel. What was the law? In Deuteronomy, the 12th chapter, verse 1 through 5, we have about 16 minutes, and I want to go ahead and read through this real quick. Now, we know that Jacob stumbled upon Bethel. We established that point. We don't see much about Bethel until Moses comes along, and in the book of Deuteronomy, where it was given the law. Let me read this real quick. It says, these are the statutes and judgments which ye shall observe to do in the land which the Yahweh thy El of thy fathers giveth thee to possess it, all the days that ye live upon the earth. You shall utterly destroy all the places wherein the nations which ye shall possess serve their gods, upon the high mountains and upon the hills, and upon every green tree. And ye shall overthrow their altars, and break their pillars, and burn their groves with fire. And ye shall hew down the graven images of their gods, and destroy the names of them out of that place. Ye shall not do so unto the Lord your God. You should not do what? You should not go and tear it up. You should not break their pillars. But more importantly, how do you identify God's house? Because it has his name on it. So it's saying you should not do so unto the Lord your God, but unto the place which the Lord your God, the Lord your God shall choose out of all your tribes to put his name there, even unto his habitation shall ye seek, and thither thou shalt come. So this is not easily found because it told you to seek this place. We have to also look at the point that we're talking about. You're going to identify his name, his place, because it has his name on it. But we see that in verse 5, it says, even unto his habitation. So when we talk about a habitation, we're talking about a place where someone dwells, where they reside. And it is clear that there's a part of him that resides in this place. That's why he wants you to come there. Okay?
That's all right. And I want to say that this has to be passed down. So the point is, how did Moses get this information? It had to be passed down from Jacob until it got down to Moses, because Jacob didn't write the law. Moses wrote the law, and Moses included what Jacob had to have passed down. Moses included Abraham had to pass down. As a matter of fact, Moses was the lawgiver. So anything that happened prior to this time, if God gave it to his prophet, they had to see to it that it was passed down so that when the lawgiver came on the scene, he could write it in the scriptures.
All right.
So this name was important to God. He wanted it preserved. He wanted it passed down, and people decided they wanted to destroy it. So, I mean, you can call your place any way you want, but don't say it's God's house.
All right. And we read again that it says, ye should not do so unto the Lord your God, but unto the place which the Lord God shall choose all his tribes to put his name there, even into his habitation. So just want to emphasize again that, yeah, we have Bethel here written in English, but there is an ancient script that has to be on the place as well. And this is the place he tells you not to destroy, but he tells you to come and seek after this place. So if you've never heard this information before, don't take it as strange. Don't take it as strange and that you never heard of the ancient biblical Paleo-Hebrew, or that people always told you it was Bethel, or even the fact that you've never heard anybody teaching one universal name for God's house. There was a plot to destroy God's name, okay? And this is one of the reasons why you don't see the name. I'm going to read through this. I believe this is Psalms. I didn't write this Bible verse down. I think it was 83 or 84. Let me go ahead and read that real quick. It says, O God, why have you rejected us forever? And I believe I might have written this from the NIV version. It says, why does your anger smolder against the sheep of your pasture? Remember the nation you purchased long ago, the people of your inheritance, whom you redeemed, Mount Zion, where you dwelt. Turn your steps toward these everlasting ruins, all this destruction the enemy has brought on the sanctuary. Your foes roared in the place where you met with us. Now, the place that had his name is the place where he met, or that he meets with his people. This is why David said, one thing have I desired of Jehovah, that I may dwell in the house and to inquire. So this Bible verse is telling you that the place where his name is, he has an appointed time to meet you there. Okay? Your foes roared in the place where you met with us. They set up their standards as signs. They behaved like men wielding axes to cut through a thicket of trees. They smashed all the carved paneling with their axes and hatchets. They burned your sanctuary to the ground. They defiled the dwelling place of your name. They said in their hearts, we will crush them completely. They burned every place where God was worshipped. So we're not talking about just one location, but every place where God was worshipped in the land. We are given no signs from God. No prophets are left, and none of us knows how long this will be. So, Elder, go ahead.
Well, you might be wondering, you rejected your people, Yisra'el, forever. Why are they talking like this? The place that they met with God at, where they had their prayers answered, was destroyed. And El speaks through his house. And they couldn't get a message from God because his house was gone. Mm. Now, God can speak to you on the street. God speaks through his house. Okay? Now, you might get a message on the street. Okay? But you want the fullness of the blessing, it comes through his house. And they recognize that in the Bible. So you ought to recognize what they recognize.
All right.
That when they destroyed that place, they couldn't get the messages that they wanted from God. One verse of Scripture says, there's no more prophet. Oh, the prophet's all right, but you couldn't find them. Why? Because the prophets dwell in the house. And if the house is destroyed, where's the prophet? So they couldn't hear from God. And they wanted to hear from God, so the only way they could hear from him is that God did something about the situation and helped them to restore his house. And that's where we're at now. But this plot was so thick that they wanted to destroy Bethel in every place that he existed. And so they went throughout the places, and they destroyed every place where he was worshipped. So this is why they couldn't hear from him. This is why they're talking like this, like as if they've been completely abandoned, because they couldn't hear from God.
Wow. And as I mentioned earlier, when you read in the book of Maccabees about the Feast of Dedication, you look at the bloodshed, and they were just, they were going completely crazy to get their temple back, because they understood that without the temple, without God's name, that their protection was gone. Their line of communication was cut. Because remember, it's the house of God and the gate of heaven where information was coming up and down off of that ladder. And so it cut their communication line off. So, they fought to the death to restore the temple. We have about 2 or 3 more slides, so we actually get your questions ready because we kind of running. We have about maybe 7, 8 minutes before 9 o'clock. Bethel and the restoration. So because it was restored, and I would have liked to spend a little bit more time on this, it has to be restored. It says, and that they, in the book of Isaiah, the 58th chapter, verse 12, and they that shall be of thee shall build the old waste places. So you're building something of old. Thou shalt raise up the foundations of many generations. So now, if something has to be raised up, that means that you have to build it. Okay? And thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. So there has to be a restore, and there has to be a restoration. And what is this person doing? What is this restoration movement about? The restoration is about the restoring of the old waste places, the raising up of the foundations of many generations. So if we look, and we want to jump to the book of Psalms, the 78th chapter, verse 5 through 8. Remember we read that he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Yisra'el? We just talked about what that was. Okay? It says, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children. So now we're talking about another generation. That word, that 4-letter word is powerful. That, the generations to come. So now we're talking about other generations that are coming, might know them, even the children which should be born. So the generations to come and their children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children. So now we're talking about number of generations. We're talking about the restoration, the foundation of many generations. That word "that" is there again. Why do these generations have to rise up? Why do we have to understand what this testimony and this law is? That these generations, that they might set their hope in God. So without the restoration, without the foundation of these generations, you can't set your hope in God. We just read the Bible verse before when the temple was destroyed. They didn't have any hope. Their hope couldn't have been in God because the source of all information, the source of protection, the gate that leads to heaven was destroyed. It says that they might set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments.
That's all right.
So without this information, you can't even keep his commandments. A couple of reasons. Remember, we just read that it was a commandment for them to go to the place which his name was placed in order to keep the feast days, in order to keep the Sabbath, in order to meet with him. So your hope is not even in him, and you can't keep his commandments because you don't have his house. Okay?
That's all. And if I might add to what you said, if we can focus our mind on just two parts of these two verses, and that is where it says, "Thou shalt raise up the foundation of many generations," and I want the key word I want you to look at, two words, foundations and generations. And of course the word "of" between the two. Then you look at the bottom verse, said that the generations to come, and we know we're talking about multiple generations that go one after the other and continue. Now, this is talking about Bethel, and how could I know that? Because it's through Bethel that they got information from God. Well, you might tell me, well, isn't this talking about the name Yisra'el, his people too? Only indirectly, because where does that name, is it taught through? It's taught through his house. Through Bethel, you get the information about the name Yisra'el. You get the information about even the name of Bethel. You get the information about all the things that El wants you to do that's involved in keeping his commandments. So the foundation of many generations starts right there with Bethel, and that's what the old waste places. They were actually rebuilding the temple that God had established in the first place, and making sure that the people of God could hear from God, because without that temple, they couldn't hear from him, and they needed it, and we need it today.
That's right. Remember a commandment. We just said that he says, "And not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments." And we want to say that a commandment, and you know what a commandment is something that God tells us to do or not to do. And we're being redundant again, and I'm not going to read through these, but the commandment was that we have to seek after the place. Okay? Where his habitation is, it tells us to seek after that place all the days of your life. Now, if you read verse 1, it tells you that it was a statue. In 2 Chronicles, the 2nd chapter, verse 4, it told you that on the Sabbaths and then on the new moons and on the solemn feasts of the Yisra'el, that this is an ordinance forever. What was an ordinance? That you come to his house to celebrate these feast days. We have two more slides, and then we're going to go ahead and ask if you have a couple of questions. We can have time to take your questions. Why is Bethel the foundations of many generations, as we were just talking about? And we stated that Bethel is the place where the source of all divine wisdom comes from. Not only is this the house of God, but it is also the gate of heaven. As I said earlier, you must come to the physical house in order to get to the spiritual gate. Now, you can come to Bethel and say, well, Minister Al, I don't see any gates up here. Where your gate at? It's a spiritual place within the house. But you can't get to the spiritual place without this, as we said, the ancient recording has to be recorded a certain way. And then there are some other things that go along with it. But the point is that the gate is inside the house. In 1 Kings, the 8th chapter, verse 28 through 30, it said he will answer your prayers out of this place. Without Bethel, you cannot keep the Sabbath, new moons, or the feast days. And that can be found in 2 Chronicles, the 2nd chapter, verse 4. Maybe next week or the week after, we're going to talk about a holy convocation. If you understand this, you're going to pick up what a holy convocation is really quick. And in Psalms, the 27th chapter, verse 4, David said that this is the place where El speaks from as well as protects. Okay, now last verse, last slide here. In the last days, all nations will seek for Bethel. All nations will seek for Bethel. In Isaiah, I don't know why I left some of these Bible verses. I didn't write them down. This comes from Isaiah, the 2nd chapter, verse 2 and 3. And it said that, and it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Yahweh's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow into it. And many people shall go and say, come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Yahweh, to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Yahweh from Jerusalem. So some people say, I don't see Bethel there. Okay. Remember Elder Avery talked about the descriptions. There are places where you may see the house of Jacob. There are some places you may see the house of God. There are some places where you see Bethel. This particular Bible verse says the house of God of Jacob. Minister Al, how was that Bethel? Remember that the word of means belonging to. So we're talking about the house that belonged to God, which belonged to Jacob. This is a description of the house. In Genesis, the 31st chapter, verse 13, we read when God says, I am the God of Bethel. So this was the house of God. He's confessing that this is his house. So it belongs to him. He's the originator of it. Remember Jacob? Elder Avery said it earlier. In Genesis, the 28th chapter, verse 16 through 19, it was Jacob who discovered it. You know, when you discover anything or rediscover something, it belongs to you. So in Isaiah 2, 2, and 3, it didn't say Bethel. It said the house of the God of Jacob. In every indication, every Bible verse that we read indicates that the house of the God of Jacob is Bethel. So, Elder, if anything, before we close out and open up our question and answer session.
Well, I'd just like to say in conclusion, because I can see that there would be people who would be saying to themselves, well, why haven't I heard this before? As we told you, there was a plot to destroy Bethel. And you know what? They did a darn good job. That's why you haven't heard of it. But look what the Bible is telling you, that in the last days, all nations are going to seek out this place. Why? Because his people are going to fortify themselves. They're going to get themselves together, and they're going to reinstitute the name that God gave for his house. And you know what? If I were you, I would find myself among them. I would walk upright, and I wouldn't be called this First Baptist. I wouldn't call it the Church of God in Christ. I wouldn't call it the Catholic Church. I wouldn't call it by all these different names that man has chosen. I'd call it by the name that God gave. And when you do that, he's going to raise up a nation that's going to raise up the foundation through a leader that he gave this to. And we will reestablish throughout the world. Oh, we got Bethel, but we're going to reestablish it throughout the entire world for those that want to believe what the Bible says. And when you do that, you'll be a part of that great nation in the last days, where all nations going to flow to it. Thank you.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful. We went about 4 minutes over, and we rushed, and we know that people may have some questions. We want you to keep in mind. We want you to keep in mind that 22. We have 22 Bible study lessons on this subject, and so we'll try to answer. If you have any questions, we'll go ahead and try to answer those to the best of our ability without going too far over. We're still in the process of developing those courses and getting those courses published, which have videos and have a lot of different things to explain certain things like what is the gate of heaven and what goes on inside of Bethel and how does God work out of that place. And you know, there's just a lot of things. We encourage you to go back and look at this. We're going to post this on our Facebook page as well as on YouTube. And especially some of those who missed the first part, there's a lot of background and foundational Bible verses that you would need. And we ask that you keep going over there and look at them. And we encourage you to ask questions. We don't say, you know, we're going to give it to you and you take it and accept it, or, you know, don't come back. We don't say that. So we ask that you have questions, and we're going to put our email address up here in a second. But *6 on your keypad, *6 on your phone if you have any questions regarding what we've went over tonight. If you don't want to talk, some people don't want to get on, you can just hold your questions, and we're going to put a email address up here where you can ask questions and send it to our email address, and we can respond that way. But the lines are open for any questions, so we ask that you just go ahead and hit *6 on your keypad if you are on the internet, or *6 on your telephone, and we'll hold it open for a few more minutes here until we see someone come up. But Elder, it's important that we ask people to look at the Bible verses. Look at the Bible verse and meditate on the Bible verse and pray about them. It's a psychological warfare, and all that El has to do. I'm sorry, I muted you, Elder. All that Satan has to do is to remove this information from you, remove it from 3 or 4 generations, so that it sounds absolutely ridiculous when you hear it. And Satan is laughing because he knows that there are a lot of people who are going to hear this information, but he kept it away for so long that it's, you know, one temple, one name for God's house, and it just doesn't sound right to a lot of people. So hold on one second, Elder. We have a question. Our evangelist, Love from Florida. Go ahead, sister.
Okay, so my question is, so are you saying, so what we're saying is that this universal recording is connected to the, okay, this universal recording is the only way that we can receive the instructions from El to, I'm saying my question wrong. Okay, this universal recording is the connection to El. You know what? Let me mute it.
Okay.
I gotta rethink my question.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm gonna clear it. Go ahead and hit *6 again, and I'm gonna mute you. One of the things, and I don't know if that's what she's trying to say, that there's a recording style. El, he is drawn to a certain way of his name being recorded. The exact same script. It's his personal name. It's, you know, the Bible talks about his handwriting, that he wrote the commandments. So there is a way that he writes himself. And so there's an ancient Hebrew script that when El sees his name on a house, he's going to come. And he's going to respond to that name because it belongs to him. Now, there are some people who will have the name. I don't want to say people steal a name, and people will come and get this information and steal it. But if you are not doing according, see, he reveals this information. When he says, I record, there's a way that he records it. He has to give, and this comes through divine revelation as far as what writing style. We have to prove which writing style that they use at that time. And so it comes from a chief leader. And so when that name is recorded, he's going to respond, now steal the name if you want and put it on the building. The Bible already says, see what I did to that place in Shiloh, how I destroyed it. He's going to respond whether that name is legitimate or whether somebody stole it, but that's his name. And when he sees it, he responds. And if you're not in accordance with all the things that go along with having the name, then he'll destroy it because that's his name. He's going to take his name down. Okay? Elder Evers,
okay,
you
if I might add,
Yes,
if I might add to what you just said, and I want to talk about the recording itself because I think that's the direction she was going in. The universal recording is actually for the house so you can recognize where to go. Now, the message you get from God comes from or through the house. So you must understand the recording to know where to go, and once you go there, that's the place where you get the information through, and so that's why the recording is so important, because God does not recognize things that he didn't start. I know people will tell you, well, God knows my heart. You know what? God knows what he said, too.
Right.
So it's important that if we're going to keep the commandments, we're going to do what he said. Look at what Moses told you. Moses told you, don't destroy God's house the way you do it to these others. Now, why? What is he talking about? He's talking about the way he recorded it. Don't destroy this. So Moses had to have it recorded. And he's saying, you destroy all the names of the gods wherever they worship their gods at. In other words, if you're destroying the name, you're destroying the way they wrote it. Mm-hmm. But don't destroy the way that this name is written. So if I come 100,000 years, 50,000 years later, and I write the name in some other language, now I may write it there just for you to understand what it is, but that's not the recording. I must record it the way it was originally recorded with Moses. And therefore, when I do that, God will recognize the place, and he will through the place. So you can steal it all you want, but you don't know what you're doing, and God will recognize it one way or the other. He's either going to come to that place, and he's going to do some destruction, or he's going to come there and give some information.
That's right. That's right. And he wants to come there and bless, and some people read this Bible verse.
Yes.
And some people read the Bible verse and say, well, I'm going to get the name and I'm going to use it. But if he didn't set it up, and he has a chief shepherd, and he has a structure by which this name is given and recorded. You don't know the name. You don't see the name. And, of course, you have people who's going to see money signs, and they're going to get a revelation on this particular principle, and people will try to take stuff and use it for their own good, but you can't steal it because God is the one that's blessing. Now, you think you're going to get something out of it. You're going to get a curse. And we can see that, and we can show a number of Bible verses where he came and destroyed people and destroyed the house. Although they had his name on it, they weren't doing right. And so that's important. We got one more question. We probably just take one more. It's about 10 minutes after. Go ahead. Is this 0088, Sister Sandra?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead with your shalom, sister.
Okay. Shalom. I wanted to know what is the process of setting up another like Beyth out of state or within the same state?
Okay.
How is one established? How is that established?
Okay, that's a good question. Elder, you want me to address that, or something you want to address?
I feel free to address it.
Okay.
That is done through the structure that God set up. He gave some apostles and some prophets and so forth. So there's an internal structure of the church, and you do not set up anything without going through the internal structure. Therefore, you will have to make sure that you're on a level where those that are officiating at Bethel, who are responsible for any Bethel that's set up, you have to go through them.
Right.
Are you I hope you're understanding what I'm saying. I'm saying that there's an order. First apostles, secondary prophets, evangelists, teachers, and so forth. So, but you start at the top, who was responsible for the church at large. Okay, and remember the Bible said in the New Testament, ordain churches in every city, ordain places in every city. Well, that's done through a process. It's not like you just go out haphazardly and just establish it, but you must go by way of that particular order that was set up in the church.
Right. So did that answer your question, Sister Sandra?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, it's nothing like, oh, look at this revelation we have of Bethel, and you got to come here. This is just information, and the structure and by which it came, as Elder Ifrey is saying, there are people who are going to be out of state and live in other places that believe in this doctrine and believe what it is that we teach now. The revelations don't stop. And so along with Bethel comes being obedient to the structure, because just like he gave that information, there's a lot of information that he gives out of his place. And so this thing is officiated, and it's not, people, I don't know what other people do. But if we have this information, we don't do it and say, hey, give us $5,000, give us $10,000. No, we want folks to be saved. And we have the information, we have the doctrine, we have the revelations. If we get this revelation, what other revelations do we have? And so we just have to make sure that people fully understand the structure of the church. Like I said, we have people who may not have a temple. They may be in a small home, and they may build, have a section that's sectioned off for a temple. And we give them the divine biblical Paleo-Hebrew, and they put that into place. And when the structure establishes that and give them the okay, then El gives it an okay. And so they have to, if anybody want to know any more information about that, they can just go ahead and contact us. Any questions that individuals may have, and we encourage you to ask questions, and the burden of proof is on us. And so whatever we say, whatever you don't understand, the burden of proof is on us to actually prove that. They can go ahead and send their questions to the Bible study at bethel.net. Again, we'll get back to you. We try to get to you in 24 hours. I check the account often. So send any kind of questions that you have to us at BibleStudy@Bethel.net. We would love for individuals, as Sister Sandra said, to be a part of Bethel, be a part of this great movement. They can find out more information by visiting us at www.tvbethel.net. And as a member, we're going to have personal support for them and give them ordained ministers and people who they can reach out to, and actually, because there's a lot to learn. We have our online courses, as I said, that we're developing on many of the subjects that we're talking about and that we even talked about tonight. And we're developing our access to our closed circuit TV channel. They're able to also access weekly TV and audio seminars. And so wherever they're at in the country, we have places out in Las Vegas, our minister Nate, out in California and Tennessee, and other areas in West Africa. And so we do encourage those to reach out to us if they want to find out more information. I'm going to also post a video. If you guys, when you log out, and even if you don't do it today or tonight, when you click back on the link that you received, there's a video, and it talks about Bethel being a universal name. It's 6 minutes long, and I'm going to go ahead and post it on our Facebook page as well. But again, it is a link that is at the bottom of the screen. Once you log off, and if you click back on, you'll see a number of different links that we have, but we have a 6-minute video on Bethel being the universal house of God. Okay, so we want to thank you all. We are sorry we had a lot of information, and we went about 17 minutes over, but we want to thank a lot of you all for coming out. Our Sister Chris and Sister Love out in Florida, Minister Nate in Las Vegas, Sister Siobhan, our brother Yosef, Sister Sandra. We thank everyone. We have our sister, she told Kiana, I believe it is. We want to thank her for joining us on the night as well. This Bible study will be recorded, and it'll be uploaded sometime tonight or in the morning. So we thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again next week. And we ask that you'll just have a blessed Sabbath, a blessed night, and shalom.
Shalom.